Good afternoon, Tami, and thanks for discussing this very important issue in our country on your show today. Definitely the issue with the numbers is that we as South Africa have very strong data management systems in terms of our school data. But unfortunately, some of the issues around tracking learners at a learner level and being able to track kids across a long period of time, so as they journey through school, is very difficult. And so, in fact, those numbers around dropouts always are speculated and are based on averages of attendance and enrollment that aren't often in real time. So at the moment, we can retrospectively look at how kids are doing. So we look at the data from previous terms, for example, but we don't have real-time data that is reliable, and we don't have longitudinal data that is reliable, which makes it difficult for us to predict and project trends around dropout and also to anticipate the number of dropouts. However, we have been dealing with a large number of learners who disappear from the school system even before the pandemic. So one of the research reports that was issued in 2016 tracked one cohort of kids across school using ID numbers and doing a little bit of triangulation and finding that only about 40% of kids, only about 60% of kids make it to the matric year, and only 37% of those pass the matric. So we're losing 40% of our kids on an annual basis, either getting stuck in the school systems through repetition or dropping out of school. This is pre-pandemic. And so there is concern that those numbers and those figures have definitely increased. And I think we're likely to see more reliable data and stats in the new year when we have the full enrollment data and attendance data on our school administration systems.
So what are the reasons that have been given for a dropout that have made part of this particular report?
So dropout really, globally and in the literature and in research is described as not a singular event, but something that comes really at the end of a very long process of disengagement. And disengagement really is this process at which learners kind of, exit from school or stop participating in school. So it's about school participation. And that's really impacted by a range of factors that either push a child from school or pull a child from school. Often occurring within a school space would push a child from school is, things like repetition. So if you're struggling academically, you're struggling to keep up, you're in an overcrowded classroom, for example, you're experiencing bullying at school, or pull-out factors like, being food insecure at home, education not being a priority, not having a safe space, experiencing trauma. And all of these factors interact to either heighten your disengagement and then making it more likely for you to drop out of school. Now, our learners, many of our learners in our poorer settings, so in our quintile 1 to 3 schools, are often navigating a number of these factors at the same time. If I look at the stats currently, pre-pandemic, only about 40% of kids in our quintile 1 to 3 schools were at the right age for their grade, meaning that a large majority of our children were already struggling academically, had already repeated a grade, already over age for their grade. Add additionally to this the impact of the pandemic, so households being hard hit economically, not being able to attend school and catch up, not having access to resources. This really heightens the learner's disengagement and therefore their risk to being more vulnerable to drop out.
Now, we've just seen the recent, quarter labor force survey coming out. And as far as young people are concerned, the number of unemployed young people has now risen to 66.5%. Does this in any way affect or impact the dropout rate?
This is exactly why the issue with dropout is such a big crux point for our economy and for our country. And schools are really the space where we are able to access every child in this country because it's a universal access point and therefore a really useful opportunity for us to institutionalize citizenship and being able to produce, young people and people who are economically active citizens. And the matric certificate at this stage in our country is still the only signaling tool to post-school opportunities to the labor force that a learner or a young person is able, to perform with within a particular job or role. We also know that you are 4 to 9% more likely to access employment if you have a matric certificate. And the larger majority of unemployed people within our country are actually people who don't have a matric certificate at this stage. The second really critical thing about, completion of school and being able to transition into meaningful opportunities after is the fact that many young people who drop out of school are often also young people who become NEET, which is not in education, employment, or training for extended periods of time, meaning that there is a knock-on effect in terms of young people's ability to meaningfully engage in life and to become gainfully employed, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well.
This increase of the number of youth who are unemployed, I mean, this is from ages 15 to 24, sitting at 66.5%. Could it be that those who have dropped out of school are actually contributing to this number of those who are unemployed because they're not in school, they're not getting any sort of other training, and are now unemployed, sitting at home?
Absolutely. I think one of the very key things about becoming unemployed and also dropping out of school, and the research that's been done looking at the young people in our country who are not in education, employment, or training, actually suggests that you are more likely, to facilitate or find an opportunity with the matric certificate. So there's implications for your ability to seek work, your motivation in terms of doing that, life skills, and in terms of navigating life meaningfully. So it's not just about being employable, but it's also about how you show up as a person in the world, post your schooling opportunity. And so it is more likely for young people to be able to access opportunities, to have drive to access opportunities, and to be able to unlock those opportunities once they have a matric certificate. And once you are unemployed, in fact, some of the research done by the National Incomes Dynamics study that follow young people over time within the country has suggested, that young people who don't have the matric certificate and who often struggle to access an opportunity immediately are more likely to become NEET for a longer period of time. And as I said, do have implications for mental health, the ability to navigate life meaningfully, life skills, and just being functional or economically active citizens post that experience.
What are the interventions, Ms. Mansfield, that can be put in place to ensure that this dropout rate is decreased? As it stands, only half of those who actually enter the South African schooling system actually eventually even finish matric.
So the first thing we all need to start doing in our country is shifting our focus from the matric pass rate as the only result or the only mechanism for evaluating how successful we were educationally within a given year. I think one of the most important things is for us to start thinking about dropout as a KPI nationally, and to hold schools and ourselves accountable as communities around how learners are entering school. So we have the big day when everybody starts school and we make a big hurrah about it, and then supporting learners throughout their 12 years or even longer for many of them in the school space so that they actually complete. And I think that's where our focus needs to go. So making dropout a national KPI. Second to that, really investing in our tracking systems in terms of learner level data that allows us to predict trends and to see where learners' vulnerability lies and when that is heightened so that we can respond to dropout. Because we know there's a period of disengagement before the eventual event of dropout, we know that there are interventions we can put in place to respond either with psychosocial interventions or with reintegration interventions that allows learners to not drop out of the school system. And then very lastly, it's about institutionalizing psychosocial support, not only as partner organizations around schools, but definitely crowding that support into schools. We need to make the linkages between the social development sector as well as the basic Department of Education a lot stronger. And we need to have those services run in conjunction and intentionally to catch our learners that are navigating some very serious, difficult life circumstances while still trying to remain within school.